Appraisers consider the interior decorations and furnishing when determining a property value.
Well, fiction, but also it depends. We're appraising the house. We don't care what's in it. And especially in today's climate, we don't talk about the people, the things, the paintings, the whatever in the house.
Welcome to Lawrence Real and Local, Keeping It Real podcast, presented to you by the Lawrence Board of Realtors. We are your go-to source for all things real estate in Lawrence, Kansas. I'm Lexie Haskin with Flint Hills Mortgage.
And I'm Emily Robertson with McGrew Real Estate. Together, we're here to make the journey to homeownership a breeze. Join us as we share insider insights, expert advice, and a dose of fun along the way.
So welcome to Lawrence Real and Local, Keeping It Real podcast by the Lawrence Board of Realtors. And we are joined here by Michael Elliott.
Welcome.
And he's with Veritas Appraisals. We're happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So, how'd you get into being an appraiser? Give us some background. How long have you been doing this? What is an appraiser? Just all the things.
Well, I actually started typing appraisals, and I do mean type on a typewriter back in high school. Yep, with a typewriter and carbon forms.
That's really cool. I love that.
It's changed a little bit since then, and that was kind of the end of that era. And then I went to college. I'm gonna say something a little shocking as we sit here in Lawrence, Kansas. I did go to Wichita State University, but we don't have a football team, so go Jayhawk football.
Good.
Well, now go Jayhawk football.
Yeah, there we are. There we are. But did not go to college for that. I think like most appraisers, there's not really a degree in appraising. It's a little bit art. It's a little bit science. You pull from a variety of disciplines and started doing it after college. Like most appraisers, we work our way up. It's an apprenticeship style of career. So while you do take some education and classes, the vast majority of what you learn is by learning from another experienced appraiser and passing that experience down, because experience is really key in what we do. And so I've worked in a lot of different areas as far as larger companies, small companies. My company, Veritas, has been around since 2012. I've been in Lawrence for about 25 years. Working here, and just love what I do. I see something new every single day. You never know what you're going to get when you walk into a house.
So do you ever go back to houses that you've already done before in the future, and you're like, oh, I've already done this house. Wow, this looks so different. This is kind of cool. Yeah.
Yep, all the time. Once
That's
you've been
really
around
cool.
a few years and you've seen, I think I added up the other day, for houses, at least, I think I've done 14,000 houses.
Wow, that's awesome.
In my career. So yeah, it's a deal. So you do eventually run into them, and so it's interesting to see what goes on. It's interesting to see what goes on in an area. Maybe if you did the first house in that area and there was nothing there but a cornfield, and now it's a fully developed. Especially in Lawrence, there's a lot of places like that on the western and on the perimeters of Lawrence where things have changed dramatically in this town.
Kind of off topic, but do you ever walk into a house that you're appraising and go, wow, this is a really cool thing. Like, I want to do this in my house, or like I want this design.
I do that all the time.
Much to my wife's chagrin, I see everything, and I have very particular opinions about what we're going to do. So when we walk into Lowe's or Home Depot, we have an agenda. So
That's awesome.
definitely
You have your list. You're checking it twice.
Yeah.
know what to do and what not to do.
Yeah.
So definitely.
So before we get into the questions, what does an appraiser do? So, why do we have appraisers?
Well, as an appraiser, I do appraisals for a lot of different purposes. But I think for what we're talking about here today, we'll kind of focus on an appraisal for a mortgage, for a residential mortgage. We do appraisals for estates or tragically divorces or, personal financial planning, all sorts of things. But the reason it exists for mortgages is because we work for the lender. We're hired by the lender because they need to know if they're making a mortgage loan on that property that it's really worth what everybody thinks it's worth. It's to protect them. And a lot of mortgages are sold to other people besides the local lender you're dealing with. We have there's a complex web of things that go on with mortgages, whether it's backed by a government agency like a VA or an FHA, or it's just sold to an entity like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are semi-government organizations and that sort of thing. So it's to protect these parties to make sure that they're making a mortgage and a commitment to a lot of money. That if something were to happen, that they're protected on that. And so we're there as their eyes and ears. We're there as the unbiased party. I always kind of use the analogy, we're the baseball umpires, we're the NFL referees. So we don't always make everybody happy. Sometimes there's disappointments in life, but our job is to remain detached. So we're the one party in the transaction that our fee, everything that we do is not based on making that transaction happen. And, not that we're trying to be a monkey wrench in transactions, but at the same time, we have to remain detached. So we're the one party that steps back, and we're bound to tell the truth no matter what it is.
And I will say, as a loan officer, that if Michael and I are on the deal together, I'm not allowed to talk directly to him. Mm-hmm. That is a huge no-no. So, I have to go through third parties and in order to get information over, and just cannot have the direct contact. So that is a big no-no.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll get my hand slapped.
This is the one format when we can have a conversation. So.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's dive into the questions.
Yeah. So what specific factors do you look for in residential homes for appraisals, and what affects it? Yeah.
Well, I'm going to probably use this word a lot today, which is it depends, because real estate is a very fluid, dynamic thing, and everything is different. Until the robots start buying houses, everything is, and this is why we have a human set of eyes looking at everything, because it takes a human being to figure this out. In most cases, if you boil it down into a simple house that's in town in a subdivision, it's the kinds of things that everybody really thinks about: the square footage of the house, the condition of the house, how old it is, the various features, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, how many garages, those sorts of things. But it can get very complicated. Sometimes those things can take a back seat if the property is very unique. If you have a property on 80 acres out in the middle of nowhere, and the most important feature about that is the location of where it's at, or the acreage, or some other feature, a large watershed pond or something like that, that can be a very important factor on it, and can be less important than the actual bedroom count or the square footage. So, again, it depends a lot. But generally, it's the kinds of things that everybody thinks about, the basic things as far as square footage, bedroom count, those kinds of things.
And too, the different houses that are sold within a certain time period within the proximity of the house too, because you have to make sure that those comparisons are the same, not the same, but very similar when you're doing those comparisons. Wow, that was very
it was comparable in the neighborhood in the same area. Yeah.
Let's see how many different ways I can say that in one sentence.
It was good. It was
very not concise.
Sure. And, kind of backing up to what we talked about earlier a little bit, and not to get too technical, but the way that we do an appraisal, our job as appraisers is to report the market. So we don't give a property value. We're not giving it anything. We're just looking at the market, and our job is to uncover the evidence that the market already says and determine what the market is telling us that the value is. So we're looking at that. And so one of the ways we do that, like you mentioned, is recent sales. So we look at things that have sold recently in the market. We call it principle of substitution. If not this house, then this house. And we try to find the substitute. Not necessarily a carbon copy of that house physically, but a carbon copy in terms of, would a buyer consider this house a substitute for this house? And looking at that. And so the way we do that, obviously markets change. And so it's very important that we use the most current information we can. So that's why we limit our sales to what's going on now, because the market in 2019 or in 2022 or even in the middle of 2023 isn't the same as the market that we have today.
Yeah. So, kind of going off of market value and things. So can you explain the difference between market value and just assessed value, and how you determine each of those?
Sure. Now, assessed value is generally a term we use that your county tax appraiser. I know they're also called an appraiser. In most states, they're actually called an assessor. And they do a little bit different process for a different reason than what we do. Market value has a specific definition. I know people kind of throw that term around sometimes just colloquially and say market value. Market value doesn't necessarily mean, I've heard it said, well, if two people decide on that they want to buy a house, that's what market value is. Market value has a very specific definition. It's actually in the back of every single appraisal, and it means the most probable price. There's a lot of other complexities to it, but it means the most probable price, and that's our job as appraisers, is to discover what the most probable price is, not just necessarily what one person is willing to pay. Now, as far as a comparison to assessed value, the county assesses your value, at least here in Kansas and here in Lawrence, on January 1st of every year. And they're using a more automated process. So they're using a computer algorithm because they have to assess every single property, in the county at one time. And they can't do that the way we do it as appraisers. So they're using a little more automated process. They're also not going in the house. So they don't necessarily know everything in terms of the condition and some of the features, basement finish, all of those kinds of things that maybe an appraiser would know going out there. And so we're looking at a little more detail, I would say, and we're looking at a different time frame because if you're getting a mortgage appraisal done in July, that's a different market than what the county was looking at on January 1st. So while it has some similarities, it's not necessarily, it's not apples to apples, hardly ever.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just curious with this because I'm honestly not sure. If somebody doesn't agree with the county and their assessed value, could they have an appraiser come out and say, like, look, and then provide it to the county?
Yep, we do that all the time. It's a very specific kind of appraisal, and it's something a little different than maybe a mortgage transaction appraisal because it has to be done on that same date on January 1st. We do a lot of that work actually, and again, it's not because the county necessarily did anything wrong or anything like that. Sometimes they just don't know about things. They haven't had somebody go in the house. Their computer algorithm does what it does, and it's not a human being. And again, as we've talked about, real estate is a very fluid, dynamic thing that requires a human set of eyes and a human brain to kind of think about how people react. Because we look at also, even some of the details on the sales comparables. Were they really open market comparables? Was this person distressed? Maybe you talk to somebody about it and you find out, well, that seller had a job transfer and they had to be out of there. And that's maybe why it sold a little lower. Or some other issue. And we have to get into all those kinds of issues and find out for sure of what we're really looking at and what the best answer is.
Wait, so you would have to go out on January 1st too, like the same exact day if you were going to do like the tax assessor thing?
No, we can do it
okay.
after the fact. We just, and again, without getting too technical, we can set our appraisals to a specific effective date. Now, obviously, we're going to have to make some assumptions. We have ways to do that within our rules and regulations. It's not something we normally would get into on a mortgage appraisal. On a mortgage appraisal, the appraisal's done the day we look at it. That is the date almost all the time, unless it's new construction or something like that that we're always looking at. So, but we would use an assumption, and we would find out best information that we can. Usually it's only a few months, so typically nothing has changed if we're looking at it in March or April from January. But we have to obviously assume what it was, unless we have a reason otherwise.
I was like, oh my gosh, you guys are probably so busy on that day. And how would anybody know that they disagree with the county and all that stuff? My mind was
New
getting
Year's Eve
blown.
celebrations.
I was like, that's crazy.
But there is a very limited window to appeal, and so unfortunately we do see that. I'd encourage anybody who's thinking about that, they need to read their notices that come, and there's deadlines and things that they need to comply with to do that. So
yeah. I mean, that's good information.
Yeah, that's awesome information.
Because too, that does affect the taxes that they have every year, which so we're going to go sell and then somebody's going to be purchasing, then that could affect the taxes that they would have in their mortgage payment going forward. Yeah, absolutely. So just a whole round circle.
Yep. And, sometimes too, it's just a matter of what's changed in the year because the county's doing your entire year assessment on one day. The last year and a half to 24 months were a good example of that, where mortgage rates jumped dramatically. So what the market was at the end of the year was completely different than what it was at the beginning of the year. And so if we're looking at it at a set point in time, the comparables you use, everything can change just in 8-9 months from that date.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So, what are some common challenges or obstacles that appraisers encounter during the appraisal process, and how do you address those?
I'd say probably one, not really maybe outside of the process, is just getting everybody to understand what our role is, what we can say, what we can't say. We have a lot of confidentiality rules as appraisers, like we just talked about who we can talk to, and just why we're there and why we're doing what we're doing. There's a lot of misinformation. There's just a lot of confusion as to what we are. So getting people to understand that so we can get the information we need is sometimes a problem. Challenging properties. I do a lot of challenging properties, and there's not always a perfect comparable for a berm home on 80 acres with a pond and a llama farm. So,
Sounds awesome.
What, there are like tons of llama farms around that you could use as comps?
oh, yeah, not typically, but of course we're not appraising the llamas.
Yeah.
We're just the ground they're standing on. But yeah, that is probably the biggest challenge because that's an issue where there's no cut and dry answers, and so we have to get into the details and say it like it is sometimes, and that tends to become a problem on the more challenging properties and things that we have a concept we call highest and best use, and so sometimes that can be an issue. Here in Lawrence, we have a lot of mixed-use properties. We have a lot of properties that have been converted that were once an old Victorian mansion that are now a fourplex, and there's a lot of complexities in terms of the zoning and what that property can be used for. So getting into those issues as well can be a challenge, especially in a place like Lawrence.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I mean, with those more complex appraisals too, people don't understand that those turn times can be a little bit longer and they won't be back in a week or two, most likely.
Yep. I mean, we know everybody is anxious and focused on the transaction, but as appraisers, we have to come up with the right answer, even if it takes a little bit more due diligence, a little bit more research on our part. We can't, as appraisers, we can't afford to cut corners and do that.
Yeah.
So how can a homeowner kind of prepare their home to maximize the appraised value?
A lot of times we see myths about, does my home have to be clean? Does it have to be show ready? Appraisers are human beings like everybody else, but we're not grading your home on whether laundry's out. We often see homes where people have moving boxes because, that process is going on. So we understand that. But we do need to be able to see as much of the house as we can. So as long as we can access the home, see everything, it's also a very good idea to have, sometimes they refer to it as a brag list or just a list of things that you've done to the house. We put a new roof on 3 years ago. We finished the basement 4 years ago. Those kinds of things give us time frames because everybody's definition of new is different. Well, we have a new roof that was put on 10 years ago, and those kinds of things. So time frames are good. All of those kinds of things. Information about the house. Did you just buy the house last year? What were the conditions? But now you're selling it a year later. Tell us about that. We need to know things about that. So all the information is probably key, and just giving us access to the property.
Yeah, the whole we bought a new water heater when we moved it in, and you're like, well, when did you move in? Oh, about 20 years ago. And you're like, oh.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe new to you, not new to the person moving in.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So
go ahead.
Some people are afraid or weary of government loans and government appraisals, whether it's VA or FHA. And should they be weary of those? Just why or why not?
I'm on the VA panel. I also do, which I think is a terrific program, and I also do a lot of FHA appraisals. Those differ a little bit. VA has a specific panel of appraisers. FHA, a lot of appraisers do that. Because these are government-backed mortgages, the government decided that the homes that they're going to back for these programs need to meet a minimum standard. So it's not a home inspection that we do. And I know that sometimes that can get confusing. The best thing I could say is just be familiar, whether you're an agent or a seller or a buyer going in. And these, they're not a mystery. They're all available online, either the FHA handbook or the VA handbook. And it's pretty cut and dry. They come down to just some basic concepts of, the safety and the soundness and the security, the 3 S's we call it, of the property. Basic things. You can't have an open electrical wire hanging out of the wall. If the house was built before 1978, you can't have peeling lead-based paint because we can't have children eating paint chips off the windowsill and those sorts of things. So just some basic safety things. And again, it's not going to tell you everything that might possibly be wrong with a house. That's the job of a home inspector, not an appraiser. But when we're looking at the house, we have 2 eyes, and we have to call out and see the things that meet those standards, whether the property does or doesn't. And it's usually a pretty cut and dry process. But the best advice I could give, again, to homeowners or agents involved is know what those are. Know what your property is before you get too far down the process, so you don't have a surprise at the end of the process, and you can kind of head some of those issues off.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I mean, and we did talked to Michael about potentially coming back for a more in-depth episode on nuances of FHA and VA appraisals, because I do think that a lot of people are weary when looking and comparing offers that they get if they have a conventional offer versus an FHA or VA, and they're like, oh, well, this appraisal might be a little bit more difficult. This process might be a little bit more difficult. When in reality, it's not more difficult. Just sometimes there are extra things that you need to do to ensure the safety and security and just all the things of the house, which is kind of just best practice in general.
Yep. And, on the VA, I'm very proud to be on the VA panel and serve veterans. And the VA has a lot of good processes in there. Just one other thing on the VA process that they have that no other loan type has. They have a process that has a funny name called Tidewater, but it actually allows, if there's going to be an appraisal that might come in less than what the contract price is, there's an opportunity for the agents and everyone involved to weigh in on that before the appraisal gets finished. We stop, we notify everyone, and everybody gets a chance to weigh in, provide us some data, maybe something we weren't aware of, maybe a comp they think we should look into. And so I think that's a really good process. You don't get that with a conventional loan or even with an FHA. So I know sometimes there's some confusion on that, and maybe that's a bad thing, but I think the Tidewater process is a very good thing when it comes to VA. It helps move things along. It's very good for the veterans.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's really cool.
I mean, I've heard of Tidewater, but I wasn't very familiar with it. So that was definitely a good thing to just go into a little bit deeper.
Yep.
Deeper Tidewater.
So are there any legal or regulatory requirements that appraisers must adhere to when appraising a residential property?
Yep, we're a very regulated industry. Of course, I have a state license, like most appraisers. There's a variety of licenses. You can get a license for commercial appraisal. They call it a general appraiser, which is what I have. And there's a wide variety of federal laws when it comes to residential appraising in particular, especially for mortgage use. We're subject to many of the same things that realtors and lenders, the Fair Credit Act, Equal Credit Opportunity, the Fair Housing, is a big one. Fair Housing Act, we're subject to all of those laws and regulations. But the biggest one would be what drives our state license. It has a long, convoluted name called the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. It's been around for about 40 years, but it's been state law in all 50 states for about 50 years. And it's what we're held accountable to when we have appraisal licenses. And there's a lot of things, and probably the biggest thing we talked a little bit earlier and touched on is the confidentiality. Gets confusing because people don't understand who we can talk to and when we can talk to people. Again, our client for a mortgage appraisal is the lender. So it's kind of like an attorney-client privilege. We can only speak to the lender about value. Now, we can speak to other people. We can speak to the agent and get information. We can gather. We can have conversations. We can even talk to the lender about certain things. We just can't get into the conclusions and the values, except in a very defined process. And that's for a very good reason. We don't want to live in a world where appraisers are colluding with people, and that nobody wants that kind of real estate market. And so that's set up, for very, very good reasons. I know it's frustrating sometimes because people want to tell the appraiser something, and when I take phone calls and I have to tell them, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you. Much as I would like to talk to you about this, I can't. But there's ways as long as it goes through the proper channels. So.
Mm-hmm. They're like, let me send this to you in code. I'll drop off a secret envelope that has a property address on it with all the information in it. And you're like, where did this come from?
Yeah, no.
This is very sketchy.
But I will say, I know there was some things that came out maybe 10, 12 years ago where agents were afraid that they couldn't speak to appraisers, and that's just not the case. We'd love all the information that any agent wants to give us. We're always happy if a lot of agents have an appraiser packet or something that they for people like me that are email people, we love it by email and not all the paper, but any information, we're always happy to get anything that you want to tell us. We can't necessarily give you our opinion right then. We have to remain unbiased and adhere to a lot of confidentiality, but always happy to talk to people and listen to their concerns, listen to the things that they want to tell us.
You can receive the information. You just can't give out your opinion on the information.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of like detectives a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Property detectives.
Yeah.
Yep.
Find the value.
So what role does the neighborhood or surrounding area play in determining a property's appraised value, and how do you assess this factor? We kind of talked about that a little bit when it came to like comps and stuff like that, but does the neighborhood in general have more of a role than people realize?
It does. I mean, the old cliche, of course, in real estate is location, location, location. And that is very, very true. But like I talked about earlier, with everything in real estate, it depends, is the phrase we use a lot. But, if it's a house in a subdivision here in town, the location is very important. We cannot use a comparable 20 miles away or 10 miles away or on the other side of town and ignore the comparables that are in that neighborhood. That's one of our primary issues that I see a lot. People will say, well, there's a house in this other subdivision over here. Now, that being said, sometimes houses are unique. Sometimes there's a reason to go outside the neighborhood. If you have the only Victorian two-story left and everybody around you built 2020 ranches around there, well, then you're not going to use the houses in that neighborhood. Those aren't necessarily the substitutes for your 100-year-old Victorian mansion. We need to go outside that neighborhood and find houses that are similar. But you can only do that when it's reasonable to do that, when there's a reason, in that case to do that. You can't ignore the things because those are the substitutes in your neighborhood, is what we're looking at. So the most important thing is what is the substitute?
That's a good answer. I like that.
Well, are you ready to get into our fact or fiction appraisal edition?
All right.
Let's do it.
Well, and if you do want to expand on any of these things,
Yeah.
you can. You don't just have to say fact, fiction.
Yeah.
So
if there's anything where you're like, I'm going to answer this, but this needs more context around it to make sense.
You can expand.
Absolutely.
Okay, take it away.
Let's do it. Okay. First one. The assessed value of a property is always equal to its market value.
I would have to say it depends, but I'm going to probably answer some of these that way, but usually fiction.
Yeah.
And it's for the reasons that we kind of talked about, not to reiterate that too much, but the county does their assessed value. If we're talking assessed, that's a county valuation. It's done on a different date. It's done using a different process. It's, should hopefully be in the ballpark of where it is. If we have a market that's going up, we've been used to markets that generally go up every year, but the last couple of years we've had markets that fluctuate a little bit. So that's not always true, especially if the market is going up or down differently, that's the case.
Appraisers consider the interior decorations and furnishing when determining a property value.
Well, fiction, but also it depends because, one of the points I always make is we're appraising the house. We don't care what's in it. And especially in today's climate, we don't talk about the people, the things, the paintings, the whatever in the house. We don't care about any of that. We're just emptying the house out and looking just at the house. Now, that said, when we talk about decor, sometimes those are things that permanently affect the house. If you've got every room painted fuchsia and you've got blue shag carpet, we have
on
to
the
look
ceiling.
On the ceiling, yes, exactly. That may be great for you and what you really like, but our job is to report what the market says. And if the market says that everybody is going for fuchsia paint, and again, colors are a very particular personal thing.
Yeah.
But in general, it would have an extreme example like that. If it's something that a typical buyer is going to have to come in and go, wow, I'm going to have to spend money to repaint this house before we can live in it.
Yeah.
Then that's something that we would need to consider. But otherwise, again, we're not generally looking at that. We're looking at the real estate itself.
Next question. How can homeowners can influence the outcome of their property appraisal by providing gifts or incentives to the appraiser?
Well, I'm going to laugh and say fiction, but it is a very serious topic because, as we talked about, we're state licensed, and I don't think there's anybody that can bribe an appraiser enough to say, I will pay your salary for the next 10 years, because that's what we're essentially talking about there is it is never worth it to an appraiser. We take our ethics very seriously, just like realtors have a code of ethics from their organization. We're subject actually to those same code of ethics along with state laws, the USPAP that we just talked about, and those kinds of things. And, we didn't get into this necessarily to make everybody happy and those kinds of things. So we have to be very, very serious about our ethics and detached. So
Absolutely. Yeah. Home renovations always increased a property's appraised value.
That's also a fiction, but also it depends.
Yeah.
Because, also a cliche is that cost does not equal value. And that's very true. Obviously, some renovations will increase the property. Now, it's also important to make the distinction between renovations and repairs, because if you put on a new roof and you did paint, but nothing had been done to that house for 30 years, is that a renovation, or are you just bringing the property back to zero? Or are you just bringing it back to consistent with what everything else has in the market? So you may have spent money doing that, but it's not necessarily going to increase the market value of the home if all you did was bring it consistent with the other things in your neighborhood. So it depends on what it is. And again, it's back to that we're reporting what the market says, not what we feel as appraisers. So are buyers in that market for that kind of home? Are they valuing those particular renovations? Are they looking for those kinds of things?
It's so funny that you said is it renovation or repair, because I was just sitting at my table this morning eating breakfast thinking, well, probably have about this much in my house, but probably gonna have to spend this much to get new carpet because of my big dogs before we move out in X amount of years.
Yeah.
I was like, well, gonna have to probably get new flooring, but that's not really a renovation. It's more of a repair sort of thing.
That was a really good distinction. I liked that a lot. I think that's something a lot of people don't really think about when they're doing it, but
There's a cost to maintaining a home when you own a home.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't take that into account.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome.
Well, if there's anything that you just want to nail into our listeners' brains.
Well, like I said, I think probably the biggest misgiving is that people are afraid maybe to talk to the appraiser, tell them things. We like information, understanding what we do. We're doing it. We're fact-based. So we're looking at as many facts as we can, and then we're providing an analysis on those. At the end of the day, an appraisal, the definition of an appraisal is an opinion of value, which is a human set of eyes looking at the house and doing what we do. Now, we're probably the oddball out in the transaction. We are detached from everything. So it makes it sometimes difficult to understand. But I would just say, be willing to understand what we do, give us information, and accept that sometimes there are facts in the market. And I think that's the way, it may be disappointing in the short term. Sometimes that happens, and I know that's why sometimes people are frustrated when they hear the word appraiser. But I think it's the kind of market that we all want to operate in is a market that's transparent, that's based on truth, that's based on facts.
Absolutely.
So I know that was supposed to be the final thing, but I have another question that just popped into my brain. So some people are probably wondering, how long are appraisals valid for? Because aren't they just good for X amount of days or that can be used, or is that just for lending? Or
it depends a lot. Typically for a lending appraisal, that's going to depend more on the lender. FHA has a specific time. If it's a VA, that can follow the veteran, so they can go to a different lender, and it can be good for a set period of time. Just in general terms, the appraisal is good until the market changes. So because an appraisal is done at a set point in time, we're determining what the market is saying the market value is on a set point in time. Well, if mortgage rates jump or something happens in the market, or it's a difference between a spring market and a fall market or something like that, and it changes, then the market value changes at that point. Or if something happened to the house or something changed with the house, that can affect it as well. Generally, if you're thinking about, keeping the appraisal and doing something with it, that's a discussion you want to have with a lender like yourself, because every lender can have, their internal policies for how they do that.
Yeah.
But, a year would be the max, but it's usually just a few months.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I was like, we probably should have had that in a question or something.
Yeah, that was a good one. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I feel like you had a lot of really great information that we
thanks for having me. It was good to do this. It was good to speak out about appraisals. I know we don't often get heard, because again, we can't really talk to people sometimes about certain things like this.
Yeah.
So good.
Because I can't have contact with you guys. I was like, Emily, I really want to have an appraiser on here, but I don't have relationships with any of them.
Yeah.
So I don't know who to talk to. So when we ran into you, I was like, yes.
You're pumped. It's a great thing.
They found me crawling out of my cave.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Well, yes, thank you again for being on here. I'm Lexie.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Michael Elliott.
And thank you. And thank you to the Lawrence Public Library for letting us use their podcast studio. We love it. And thank you to Flint Hills Mortgage, our sponsor.
Sweet. Okay.
Thank you.
Signing out.
Thanks for joining us on Lawrence Real and Local, Keeping It Real podcast. We appreciate our guests taking the time to join us. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review if you've enjoyed today's episode.
For more information, please visit us on the web, www.lawrencerealtor.com. And remember, whether you're buying, selling, or simply dreaming of your future home, we're here to help. Until next time, keep it real
And happy house hunting!